Now, so I think we're ready to kick off here. So firstly, just to say welcome to the ISME and the HSA Managing Stress webinar. We have a bit of a questions and answers session going on today, and it's on the topic, the very important topic of managing stress, managing work-related stress, and dealing with all of this kind of thing in the workplace. So just before we start, a few notes. So if I could ask that everybody excuse me, that everybody puts themselves on mute. If you have questions, you can pop them into the chat box. Our team are working away to manage that. We will do our absolutely best to get to everyone, but there is a lot of interest in this, obviously enough. So we are going to try and avoid the repetition, etc. So if you have a question that we don't get to, you can pop it through to marketing@isme.ie and we can have a look at it that way if we don't get to your particular question today. Excuse me. Now, we are aware that this is running through lunch, so we are going to finish at 1 to 2 so that you can all go off and grab a cup of tea and everything before you get back to it. And just before we kick off, to say thanks to everyone for coming on board. Now, today we are lucky enough to be joined by two experts in their fields and very knowledgeable people dealing with this. So we have with us today Patricia Murray, who is the professional work and organizational psychologist at the Health and Safety Authority. She directs and manages the National Psychosocial Programme of Work, and she has designed, developed and leads the work-related stress and bullying portfolios and initiatives focused on increased employee well-being. So Patricia is extremely knowledgeable in this area, and would like to say thank you to Patricia for giving us your time today. That we're also joined by John Barry. So John has been a practitioner in human resource management and industrial relations for over 42 years. John established management support services, providing HR and administration support representation on all matters excuse me, on all matters concerning Irish employment law, human resource practice and procedures, industrial relations and recruitment services to a broad range of companies. And MSS have been members of and have always worked closely with ISME since its formation. So again, John, thank you very much for giving us your time and your expertise today. So I'm going to pass over to Patricia now and we will get started today. So again, just to ask before I pass over that everyone pops themselves on mute and just uses the chat box function if you have questions.
Thanks, Coach, and thanks, Maeve, and thanks to ISME for inviting me along today, and thanks to you guys for being here in your lunchtime. Hopefully you've got a sandwich there or a cup of tea or something even more healthy there. So I want to just introduce a little bit about my frame, if you like, or what I'm bringing to this talk, because there's loads of expertise. Thank you for your kind words, Coach. But the more you know about something, the more you know you don't know, or other people certainly have plenty of expertise in different areas. So my approach to it is I'm an organizational psychologist. So I'm coming with that training and background, looking at everything from the perspective of work systems, organizational systems, and how people behave in groups and in teams and in institutional settings. And that is different to how we behave individually. So we obviously bring the individuality of ourselves into work, but we do behave differently in different contexts. So a lot of philosophical psychology would look at, is there one individual person, or are we chameleons, and do we move and change like water in different situations? And to an extent, we are dynamic and we change in context. That's kind of well established, but there is a core sense of who we are and identity too, and more so as we come into middle age and then become more kind of, I suppose, you identify with certain characteristics. So in terms of stress at work, then what I'm really looking at is the individual, the self, as we know how we identify ourselves. Do we identify as extrovert or introvert? Do we frame things in a positive or negative light? Are we cautious, or are we risk averse or risk taking? Are we pro-social or are we anti-social? And we often don't know some of those things about ourselves, but they all matter. And the second frame I'm bringing to it is workplace. And what workplaces are like. What is the culture of the workplace? Do you work in a public sector agency or do you work in a private organization? And what is that culture like? And that will feed, it's a double feedback loop. That will influence you and make you readjust yourself to fit in, but not so much that you lose yourself. And then the final thing I think that we're all talking here about is the last 2 years and the huge change that's been brought about globally. And that has affected us individually, with our friend group, with our partners, with our children, with our siblings, with our neighbors, absolutely everything. And with ourself to self, because we've had more time to be alone, and some of us more so than others. And that has influenced, do we want to continue on our jobs? Do we want to be different and be more embedded in it? Do we want to learn new things? Have we made new decisions? And so that's a big piece in the whole stress piece. And finally, I suppose the Health and Safety Authority, where I work, we are the regulatory agency. So we look at the employer's duties to the employee. And the employer has duties to the employee, but only insofar as is reasonable. The employer is not tasked with making sure we're all feeling great every day. No employer could, no mum can, no dad can, no best loving partner can. So there will always be distress and there will always be stress. But what the employer is responsible for is to make it as reasonable as possible for as many people as possible. And the Health and Safety Authority's role is to enable that, to assist that, to help that. And if need be, then to use our legislative remit to ensure that employers tweak their systems or change their systems or put in a new system to make sure they do that. So that's the perspective I'm coming from. And I'll answer questions, and I've seen some of them in advance. It looks like it'll be a really interesting session. So sit back and relax, and I'll pass you over now to John.
Thanks, Patricia. Yeah, I suppose the perspective I'm coming from this is that life has become stressful, both domestically and in the workplace. And I think we've seen over the last 40 years, as Koch reminded me, that I've seen a huge change in the pressures outside of work as well as pressures inside of work. And I would often say that, whilst work would be often blamed for people being stressed, often they are stressed coming in, but when they're in work, because of the pressures in work, you can't escape to defuse or unwind. Whereas when you're at home, you might be able to disappear off for half an hour or something to try and defuse yourself. So life has become overall very stressful. And the last 2 years, probably even more stressful for everybody. And is bringing new problems in terms of stress and the workplace. Least of all, people afraid to come back to work or do not want to travel in public transport and things. So stress has become a big problem. So I will be looking at it in the context of how employers react to that. We'll be looking briefly at how possibly to identify where stress if someone is being stressed, but also possibly look at what can we do for people? How can we provide them with release valves? How can we provide them with support? And how can we bring people through the process of coming from being stressed to de-stressing, in as much as we as employers can do that. We take into account that at the end of the day, that person still has to go home to an environment where we have no control. So we have to try and marry the two together. And in this climate, it has becoming more and more difficult, but with patience, and that's what it boils down to all the time, patience and understanding. And I think most cases, we can help people to work their way through the process. So that's where I'll be focusing on. And obviously any questions from you reflecting those issues, we'd be happy to deal with them. So I'll put you back to Koch.
Great, thank you very much, both of you. Now, so we'll kick off, we go straight into the questions that we have received in advance. So the first one, and it's a great one to start us off, and I'd be interested on hearing both of your perspectives on this one, but we might start with you, Patricia. How do you differentiate between work stress and life stress, as John was talking about there? What is the difference between stress and work-related stress?
Okay, well, the manifestations are similar. So the manifestations are physiological and cognitive and emotional. So in your body, they would have similar manifestations in terms of feeling that you're in a hurry all the time, increased heartbeat, increased cortisol, sweaty hands, and a feeling of panic. So regardless of where the stress comes from, cognitively, less ability to think clearly, more crashing of thoughts coming together, and emotionally more prone to the upsets, whether it's anger or whether it's crying and upset. they're both upsetting in terms of you're not in control of your emotions. So manifestation is similar, but to find out what the cause is, and this question does illuminate some of the difficulties, because the person themselves is not the best diagnoser of what the cause is, for starters. So it's unlike any other ailment or physical ailment. If someone has a torn ligament, they don't think it might be in my shoulder or it might be in my calf. They pretty much know where it is. And usually they can think of something that happened that might have started it. But again, they're not sure, but they think, was it the walk? Was it whatever? But they're not disabled in their thinking about what started it, because the injury itself has nothing to do with how they think. That's different in stress, because when you're stressed, you're cognitively and emotionally impaired. So your thinking about the cause is impaired. So therefore, you're not the best person to diagnose yourself. One, because the manifestation is the same regardless of what caused it. So none of us can get through that easily. And two, our thinking and feeling is impaired. So we're not good judges. So how we in the psychological community and in the medical community look at what the cause is we look at what happened when there was no stress in the life, or where the person didn't report the stressors, and then what happened between that time. So often, I'll give you a case, a person would say, I'm very stressed about an issue in work that happened. I've been stressed for the last 2 months since I moved jobs. Well, you can think, okay, well, you weren't stressed before that. What are the symptoms? You didn't have them before. You did move job. So we jump to the conclusion that it was that. Now, if you're in a clinical or a counselling arrangement with that person, you'd say, what else is going on for you? And what sometimes happens is they moved house at the same time. A loved one left, and there's an issue with the child. So then you have to say to the person, okay, why are you locating it there at the change of job? Obviously, it's a myriad of things. It's a mishmash of things. And what the research says is the cause is usually an amalgam of 3 things, which are increased demands, reduced support, and reduced control. So whether they come from home or work, that's what you have to decipher when you're trying to find out what the cause is. And from a workplace perspective, what you'd always be saying is, what is it about the workplace that is causing you stress? You have to identify that, and you need to work through that. And then, are you sure it's that? What else is happening that it might be that you're overlooking? And what do you think might address that? So that's kind of a way. So it's a bit of a Columbo puzzle you have to go through.
Yeah, I think that the one thing I've experienced certainly is that there is an assumption for someone when they're out sick from work, and I hope there's no GPs listening, but the assumption that they're out because of work-related stress, and I sometimes get quite annoyed about that, because they don't know. They've met someone and they say, well, they're stressed at work. But as Patricia said, stress is a combination of multiple factors, not just one single factor. And it could well be, as I was trying to say earlier, that your stress may be more visible in the workplace because you've less places to hide than, in fact, outside in the domestic environment, or if you're out, where you can walk and go for a walk, and you can go to another room and read a book or something. So it is, but I mean, there's no doubt that they are interlinked. You can't separate the two. A person doesn't switch off when they come into work. A person doesn't switch back on when they leave work. So they are a compendium of life, and you've got to try and balance the two. And I think it is a difficult one. I think people need to take time to assess what is causing an upset. It may well be a genuine work problem, but it could well be that they can't cope with normal day-to-day stuff in work because they're pressurized and stressed coming into work. And so that's why certainly we're seeing a lot more these days of companies availing of employment assistance programs, and to give people a chance to maybe sign in with a counsellor for 6 sessions or so, just to get a feel for things and start to talk things out. Because as that famous advert says, it's good to talk, and it is good to talk. And and I think that's certainly, with the risk of generalizing, if you look at the principle that women talk far more than men, women have a much more chance of, they get a habit of talking these things out. Fellas are more inclined to internalize. And I think it's been my experience that it's taken a lot, in some cases, some males, to actually realize that they are actually stressed, even just recognizing that they're stressed, and then trying to talk that out. And they need to do that with someone who's experienced in talking about these things. So that would be how I see the difference between the two, but they are intrinsically mixed together.
That, John, that's an interesting point. And from an employer perspective, if somebody gets in a medical cert, a GP certificate that has the words that everybody dreads, work-related stress, written on it, does that automatically mean an employer is dealing with work-related stress, or is there space to look into that?
I suppose the way I come from that is okay, the most important word is stress. It's not work-related, it's stress. That person is stressed out. Now we have a responsibility to that person, both as an individual, but also as an employee, to try and help them, because if they're stressed at work, then being totally selfish, they're probably not delivering 100% to my business. So they need to be encouraged to, in some ways, to de-stress. So my view would be is if, and you usually get the certificate when they are out from work, and they might be out for 3 or 4 weeks. The first thing you don't do is pick up the phone to them straight away and shout at them, why are you stressed? Who's stressing you? I'm not stressing you. But it is certainly sensible to maybe say to someone before they're due to return to work, listen, can we meet for a cup of coffee? Can we have a chat? To just see where you think at work you're being stressed, to see how we can maybe support you on your return and help you on your return. And that ideally can take place prior to return. So it gives a person a bit of confidence to come back. Some people are a bit embarrassed coming back because they're a bit embarrassed to admit they're stressed in the first place. But it's certainly, we would always be saying to employers, provide support to someone and give them the chance to settle back into workplace. Because if they have suffered from stress, it takes time to recover from it. So that's what I'd be saying.
Can I come into that a little bit as well? Because obviously we're looking at the employer responsibility and the Health and Safety Authority. So there is an onus on the employee to forewarn the employer first of what the cause is. So it simply isn't fair to anyone to say, in any relationship, you're causing me distress, but I'm not going to tell you what you're doing. So is it the employer does deserve to be told what is the cause in work of the stress? So the employer can contact the employee and say, we're very concerned, that's fine, we take your cert, but what is the cause in the workplace? Because we're going to address that. And then the employer has to look at whether or not, for instance, if it's someone who's stressed by something that's endemic to the job, intrinsic to it, then the employer is not duty bound to change that. They have duty bound to say, I'm really, I'm concerned. What do you think could be done? But the job is the job. And then it's up to the person to consider whether they don't find this particular way of working right. But they have to be forewarned of what the issue is in the system of work. And the employer then has they've got space and time to do something reasonable to address that. It might be temporarily to change a little bit of something, tweak another thing, and then see if the person can better. So they need to be shown, to be seen to be doing something. But they don't have the onus to make it all perfect. It could be that the person has chosen the wrong job for themselves, and the employee has that responsibility too.
Okay, and then we have a question in that is asking, is there a definition, a straight definition that can be applied to determine if the stress is work-related, occupational in nature, or general stress? Is it that simple?
Well, I mean, the way it's done in the Western world is it's medically diagnosed. So the person who diagnosed it usually is a medic. And obviously after that, then it would go to an occupational medical physician who's a specialist in occupational medicine. And within occupational medicine, there are tools they can use. And usually it's kind of a syndrome of checklists. Like, for instance, they look at the stress itself and see, to be diagnosed, for instance, with PTSD, you have to have 8 out of 10 symptoms for such an amount of time. So to look at occupationally diagnosed stress clinically, there'd be clinicians who would diagnose, and usually you have to have a certain amount of symptoms over a certain amount of time. And then what they do is they simply just look at when did they start and what else started at that time. So that's as expert as it gets. I mean, no one can go into the brain of the person and make sure that it was that thing that triggered that neuron that let that neuroendocrine substance into the system. They can't. But it's a checklist, and unfortunately or fortunately, it's done at medical level here, and sometimes at clinical psychology level.
Perfect. Okay, and then I suppose moving on from the definitions a little bit, we have a question here which I think everybody it'll benefit everybody to hear the answer to this one regardless, is, do you have any tips on identifying the early indicators of stress? This person goes on to say, I think sometimes we only identify stress in ourselves and others when it gets to a certain level. And I would, from a HR point of view, I would agree. I think it's very visible when it reaches crisis point. But is there anything that people can be doing to, you know, identify stress before it hits a crisis point?
I'll take this for a second, and then I'll let you. Don't talk for long, John. Psychologically, again, I'm just talking as a psychologist. So you would look at a change in the person's behavior. First of all, there's a change in their behavior. They mightn't say they're distressed. So plenty of people are stressed. And what they're doing is they're behaving in stressy ways, and they're not saying they're stressed. They're saying they're busy, or they're saying they're annoyed, or they're saying you're wrong, or they're saying the system is wrong. But usually it's a change. So if you see a sudden, and what often stressed people do is they think they don't have time. Their sense of time and its bounceability around what they want to do changes, and they don't recognize that they're in charge of changing it. And the other manifestations usually would be a change in sleep pattern, a change in sociability pattern, and maybe a change in the kind of habits of smoking, eating, drinking wrongly. So they're just immediate manifestations you might see. So I'll pass you over to John for John's view.
Well, I think the first thing we've got to realize is we're all stressed in some way. I mean, stress is part of life, it's living, you know, stress is part of surviving. So even animals are stressed because they've got to survive. So, I mean, it's there. So what we're talking about really is when is stress maybe becoming a significant influence in your life, it's actually changing your behavior or changing how you're thinking. And like that, you'll possibly find that the first thing, often one of the obvious signs would be people's attendance record, but suddenly their attendance starts deteriorating, and they're taking a couple of days here or there all the time, as opposed to a lot of time out, and it's just with suddenly they're just missing work, or arriving to work, maybe there's a pattern of arriving late or things like that. So there will be certainly signatures, as would maybe their performance at work. Their performance is deteriorated. It's either that they are not coming back with maybe what they're asked for, maybe they're taking longer than normal to do it, maybe they're reacting when they're asked to do something in a way that's, you say, that's not like John. That's not the way you normally behaves. And it's really, those are the ways you start to notice it. So there's no one obvious symptom, and some people hide it very well. But there's no one symptom, but it's usually when they start acting out of character. I think that's what Patricia was trying to say to us, when they start acting out of their normal character. If you know someone long enough, they start acting differently. There's something on their life, and how's it affecting them? And of course, there you've also got to be careful, because you are confined to the workplace. So therefore, you can't be seen to be prying into someone's life either, and if they're doing their job properly and they seem to be coping okay, fine. All you can do is maybe say to them, how you doing? You okay? Everything okay? And that's it. And unless you know them very well, but I know when our kids were at national school, I went to a parenting course for kids at national school. One of the best management courses I recommend anyone to go to. But it was, they always start off by saying, that's not like you. That the line, simple line, that's not like you. Is there something wrong? And it's a very harmless line, but it can open up a conversation which results in perhaps identifying that a problem does exist.
Great. And I think there's some really valid points in that. And it does bring us on to the next question, which is talking about explosion points in the workplace, essentially. So they're asking what can be done to prevent stress build up to the point of explosion in the workplace. And are there protocols or systems that can be put into the workplace for individuals so that these things can be cut off before we have what they're calling an explosion?
I would say that where you work into deadlines and things is where you're more prone to get explosions, because their pressure increases. Normally they can cope with it, but if they're suffering from what I call excessive stress, then they start not coping with that and they will react, and that's when they will potentially explode. And as I said, Often if it's out of character, that's fine. Some people explode at the slightest thing, but that's their character, that's their personality, and you know that. But it's when they are exploding out of character is when you would be concerned about it. I don't think you can't protect people from that, because work by its very nature has to be that way. You know, we all have to get things done by certain times and get them in, whether it be reports or whether it be sales figures or meeting people. So we all have deadlines in our life at work. And unfortunately, that's an essential part of the job. But it's really observing, you know, and I think that's exposure at work is it's just one of many symptoms.
If I can add to that, then I suppose I'm a little bit concerned about the word explosion, and I'm hoping that I'm just over interpreting it, because from health and safety perspective, obviously we have in our legislation a duty on an employer to manage improper conduct at work by any employee. And so I would not like to think that, although all of us know what an explosion is in our behavior, unfortunately, it's not to be encouraged, and employers would have a duty to make sure that if that person, he said, regularly explodes, that's just how they are. I would be thinking, if it was my company, you know, you can be as you are outside of the workplace. In the workplace, we don't tolerate regular explosions, because usually you're exploding on other people, and you have to be mindful of how your behavior affects others. So whilst you don't come in with maybe a big stick to that, you'd say, look, there are deadlines, it's very tight. I know that there's been, you know, volatility here in the workplace, but really let's recalibrate. What are behaviors that we can tolerate, and what are behaviors that we can't? We can't tolerate regular explosions. You might get away with that at home, and everyone forgives, and you move on, and you know, you sit down and you have a family hug. You can't do it at work, because other people are there. They've got rights as employees. And if you're constantly exploding on them, you know, that is improper, really, in a workplace. So what I would say employers can do is be tolerant and mindful to an extent, but always recalibrate every year, put in your training or your reminders, like behaviors that are acceptable and that aren't. And if you're finding yourself prone to exploding all the time, go and see the EAP or come to your manager. And all managers should be trained in, you can't just play out your emotional frustrations on others. You have to be bigger than that, and you have to go to somebody else and try and work it out in a different way.
Okay. The next question that's come in, I think myself and John and Patricia will all empathise with the writer of this question, but it is that HR teams and managements are currently dealing with huge amounts of uncertainty. They have huge expectations on them due to their positions. They have huge organizational pressure. They're managing the welfare of everybody else. And what can they proactively do to manage their own stress and ensure that they can continue to operate to provide a service and look after their employees? Patricia, I might hand that one to you first of all.
I mean, this could be anybody, because I know that, and I do sympathize with them, those on HR teams. You could say the same thing about those in supermarket teams who have been there all the way through, you know, going to work, those in healthcare, those in corner shops, and those in, you know, parks and recreation, whatever. So like, anyone who's in a position where they're kind of providing a service to other people rather than just dealing with machines or systems and a kind of a one or two steps back from the people. There is an ease about being one or two steps back from people. Dealing directly with people is a stressor internationally. So whether you're a teacher or a nurse, your client or your work system is very people oriented. It's more stressful because you can't predict what the other people are going to do, and you're in the middle of a maelstrom where that's concerned. So what can you do? Well, one of the things you can do is try to just think to yourself and be self-aware. It's so much easier to say it than to do it. People think they're self-aware, and honestly, when I'm in talking to them, they're not self-aware. I nearly say it goes the opposite direction. So try and think, what is it that you get joy from? And literally, what is it that you like doing in your normal life? And try and bring some of that into your workplace. And if that's walking or nature or listening to music, whatever, get some of it into your day every day. Get some exercise into your day every day. And another problem with, and I have a big long article about it here, how you frame things is very important. If you frame things in a negative way, I have 10 things to do today, I'm not going to get it done, you're much more likely to not get it done because your thinking is already negative and rushed and hurried and not clear. If you think I have 10 things to do, 3 of them are not that important, I'm going to prioritize. I'll try and do 7. If I get 6 done, whoopee, we manage. You really just do have to try and prioritize and not think you can do everything. And finally, thinking is overrated. Rumination thinking the same problem over and over doesn't make you solve the problem more. After a certain amount of thinking, there's a tipping point, and beyond that, that thinking is useless. And in fact, it could be negative because you're using the same thoughts and the same frame to think it. So what you need to do is stop thinking, ask somebody else, what do you think of this? I can't solve it. It's an issue for me. I'm going to park it there. I'm going to ask them. So there's plenty, I won't go on, but there's loads of strategies you can have to time manage, to self-manage, to emotion manage, to bring things into your life that you like doing. 5 minutes, listen to a piece of music at 12 o'clock every day or whatever. So you need to just take charge of that and just know that you can make it better, and then you can make it better.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, look, it's very simple as much as I think everybody should build into their daily life a positive action, want a better description, whether it be you go for a half-hour walk when you go before you go to work, or when you come home from work, or at lunchtime, or something which can just, it allows you to relax. It's your comfort zone for a short period of time, and we're all entitled to a bit of my time. And it's the biggest mistake we made is we often don't give ourselves my time. We're busy giving our time to everybody else except ourselves, and it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much, but it is your moment. It's your half an hour, literally, just to worry about you and think about you. And I think that if everyone can build that into their life, I think it's a start. It's not the solution, but it's a start. It gets you thinking right.
Okay. The next one that we have in now, this has come in from someone who obviously has is asking from the point of view of that they have concerns about a staff member's mental health. They have, obviously offered a solution like an EAP or to speak to their GP, and the staff member doesn't want to avail of either of those options. So what can somebody do in that instance? What can an employer do? John, you might kick us off on that. Kick us off.
I suppose, look, it's always saying you can bring the horse to the water, but you can't make them drink the water, comes to mind here. It's all you can do is be there for someone. And if you have an EAP service in your company, then I think you've got to make that person aware of its existence and maybe suggest that they even try it. I mean, it's like coaxing, just go for one session, just go and talk to them, just make a call. You don't have to do anything else. Just try and get them to look through the crack in the door and sample it, and tease it through with them. But if someone doesn't want help, you can't force them to get help. But what you can do as well, you can say, look, if you don't do this, I'm afraid that this might happen to you. I'd be afraid that you might start making enemies here, or you might start falling foul or get sick. So, but it's an open, supportive conversation you have with them. Obviously, you don't do that in the middle of an open plan office. You take them, again, a cup of coffee or to a side room somewhere where you have a conversation in a non-threatening environment. And it really is a non-threatening conversation you have to have with them, and say, and if at the end of the day, they're still not willing to cooperate, I think all you can leave it with is, look, I'm here at any time. If you want to talk something through, or if you want any help, please feel free to come to me. This conversation is confidential. No one else needs to know about it. And you're just there for, I think that's how I would handle it anyway.
Okay, I'll just say a few things. Again, coming from a slightly different angle, take on board all your points, John. I get a lot of these queries. I think it probably is the biggest query I'm getting these days is from either colleagues or family members or HR people with this query. And a few things. One is, if you really feel concerned about a person based on, and I presume it's based on their work interaction. So it's not based on hearsay or someone's friend said someone else's blah, blah. It's based on some work-related interaction you're having with the person. Maybe they've been on the phone, they've been more angry, they've been upset, they haven't done so much. So you can, as a health and safety initiative, say, I'd like you to go to see Occupational Health. It's not a threat or something negative. I'd like you to go. Maybe they'll be able to help you, and you can talk there confidentially. And you can do that. So that's always an option. So you can send someone to Occupational Health to get Occupational Health to get an assessment. And people have done this because they're afraid that if the person, for instance, is using chemicals in the workplace, or they're driving dangerous machinery, or they're engaged with customer-facing roles, the employer can say, I'm actually concerned about their well-being and the well-being of others. And because they've done these few things, and I'm going to support them through it, but I'm going to ask them to go to Occupational Health. That's one thing you can do. And also you can say, I'd like you to come to me. Let's meet me every Monday, you know, maybe 11, because it's hard to come back on a Monday, and we'll have a chat and just see how things are, how that goes. If you feel that you're worried about the person, then you might have to report it to HR or to the employer, because the employer has a duty there, and you at certain stages, there are caveats on confidentiality, and you might have to say, I have to report this because I'm concerned about you. But another few tips would be, what's really important when you're worried about somebody and you don't have as many kind of controls as you might have, is how you communicate with them. So one is, as John said, is make it a private space, make it a time that suits them. Don't be even 5 minutes late for them, because if they're feeling distressed, they're going to be really noticing things that irk them. If you're sending them emails, don't send big, long emails. Send really short, nice emails. What you're trying to do is deal with their vulnerability. So how you communicate with them is as important as what you say. But so you've got the two approaches. Be really careful how you do it. Do it nicely. Don't criticize. Be extra soft. Be extra supportive. Be extra mindful. If they're vulnerable, they'll need it. And then you have the option of occupational health. You might have to report it to the employer, but also you could put up weekly meetings so that they know every week they have a meeting with you on a Monday where they can vent or they can talk. And that sometimes works.
Okay, and absolutely, I'm glad you mentioned the occupational health piece there, Patricia, because I think often with these ones, employers, they get a little bit caught up in this, and you know that there is a line there whereby your general employer is not a medical expert, is not an expert in mental health, and you know sometimes we do need to get expertise on the area where there is a genuine concern.
Yeah.
Now there's a question that's come into the chat box there. I think we have covered it off, but we'll throw it out there, and just if you have anything that you want to add to what we've already said. Somebody has asked, do you have any tips for a situation where everyone else on the team is on edge and walking on eggshells around a colleague who's showing signs of stress? They're impatient, they're short, they're dismissive of colleagues. How would you manage that situation with that employee?
You have to take them aside. I mean, you have the duty to the other employees. You've had a report from the other employees independently saying different behaviors. So it's not like everyone's ganging up. I mean, and you need to make sure that that's not the case, because you could have a kind of a bullying scenario if it is that ganging up thing. But if you validly found out that, and it's reliable that, you know, some people on the team have said this has happened and they've witnessed it themselves, it's not hearsay, it's not contagion, it's not, you know, vexatious. Once you're sure of that, then you need to go to the person and say, you know, I've noticed. First of all, what I do is I would look myself to see if I could notice any of the things that they're saying, so that I could say I've noticed. And I think the team must be noticing, but everyone's concerned about you, and completely be repeating, we're concerned about you. What can we do to help you? Because we're concerned about you. But at the end of the day, you have to bring in the conversation towards the end. Like, these are the behaviors that really aren't acceptable, because obviously it's upsetting other people. And I know you don't want to be like that. And as John said earlier, it's not like you. So you're reminding the person of their own real identity. It's not like you. There is a you in there, and we know it, and we like it, and we want it back. We're here to support you, but we've noticed. So it's a little bit of a mix of surveillance and support. And you need to go down that road then. And if it's occupational health, it's occupational health.
I would just add to that, to say, even if you haven't noticed it, if people are coming to you, that person doesn't know whether you've noticed it or not. You can still use that as the excuse of having the conversation, so that everybody else is kept out of it, so they're not feeling victimized. You know, I mean, I think that would, but that to me is probably the best way you can handle that.
Absolutely. Now we have a few, I suppose, procedural questions that have come in as well. So the first one, and John, I might ask you to kick off on this one, is what should I do when I initially receive a cert stating work-related stress? And I think just on this one, Patricia mentioned earlier, or actually I genuinely can't remember, was it Patricia or yourself, John, but somebody mentioned earlier that these often come in. Often HR people will see a few weeks of a cert stating medical illness or something, and then it will change to work-related stress. So what is the procedure there? What process can an employer have in place to protect the employee and themselves in this instance?
Well, I think that the work-related stress is a legitimate illness like any other sickness. It really is, you know, and it's but I mean, as I said earlier on, I think that stress is most times is a combination of lots of things together. Sometimes it is exclusively being created from work in certain environments, but as soon as I see stress or work-related stress or medical certs, I would be of the view that what you're doing is you're reaching out to the individual and saying, look, we understand you're out sick at the moment with stress. When we would love to have a conversation with you even before you return to work to see how we can support your return to work. And so please contact us and give them the space to work through what they're going through at the time, but then also be ready to contact you at some stage, hopefully before they come back, so you can meet with them, maybe off-site even, to have a cup of coffee, have a chat with them, a cup of tea, and have a chat with them and get some understanding of what they think is actually causing the problem. As Patricia said earlier on, it could well be that it's part of their normal job, but it means they've been doing that job for a long, long time, then there must be some other reason beside the job and they're just blaming the job. So it is a complicated thing, but that's how I would be saying is you're saying, I'm here ready to support you. And hopefully they'll come back sooner rather than later, although some people stay out for an awful long time. And I fear what happens is they actually become stressed at the thought of going back to work at that stage because they've been out for so long. And maybe Patricia has some views on that as well.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, there is research as well known that people who are out generally for work-related stress or psychosocial are way longer than for any other thing. So there's less people out for it, but they're out for longer. And once a person is out, I think it's for now this is a long time, but I think it's for 6 weeks, then they're much less likely to come back within 3 months. So there are certain kind of tipping points time-wise. And I don't know why, I don't know the mechanisms through which that happens, but what you really want to do is at 3 weeks, which is often what happens with employers, is, send them to someone else for an assessment. Send them to some expert in the thing that they're saying they've got for an assessment to look at it. And even that itself, it shows two things to the individual. It shows things that maybe are kind of unconscious. One is, well, someone is looking, someone's paying attention, so I missed. And two is, there's a bit of a surveillance thing. Oops, I better, am I okay to go back? Because possibly I could. So it's a good idea. Now, if a person can't go back, they can't go back. It's not, but I mean, it's a good idea to realize that if the longer a person's out, the less likely they are to come back. And often the best thing for their health is to come back. But I suppose if there's a habituation, if you've gotten used to being out of work and the habits that you get into there, and you get into that warm and cozy space, it's harder for any of us to go back after being out, even if the sickness isn't stress related. It's just a little bit of a bridge to cross. So what the employer needs to do is get in there week 3 and start just being approachable and start suggesting return to work protocol. If you're coming back next week, we might do this to help you with that work. Oh, you're not coming back next week, that's fine. But if you're coming back the week after, we might look at this. You can keep in touch. So you're not bothering them, but you're doing. But another thing I'd like to just say on the whole, if it's work-related stress on the cert, if it's work-related anything on the cert, you've been forewarned as an employer that work has caused something. If it's work-related sore foot, if it's work-related stress, if it's work-related broken leg, you want to know, wow, what did the workplace do to break your leg, make your foot sore, or make you stress? Because we're going to look at that, because now we have an onus. We have a vulnerable employee. We have a risk assessment to do on that, and we have to see whether there are controls we need to put in place. So you have to follow that line through if it's work-related anything. And it's the same for stress, as John said, as for anything else. You query what the cause is, you look at the system of work, you do a risk assessment, and you put in place your controls.
Okay, and I'm just conscious of the time, so I'm going to just skip on a couple of questions here. But one big one that is, and I suppose, look, I'm seeing a bit of it in terms of my own role within ISME, and it is that organisations are going through huge changes at the moment. They are having to restructure in order to cope with the last few years. They're having to, change job roles, change how they change their work processes. If they have an employee who's out on work-related stress or any kind of anything like that, to be honest, can they contact these employees and discuss what's going on in the business with them so that they're informed as to what's going on in relation to the business and what they're coming back to if that's changing? John, you might kick us off.
Yeah, I think what Patricia said, I think, the important thing is contact when someone's out. Around 3 or 4 weeks, yes, that would be my view of the trigger time when you're saying we'd like you to go and see our own occupational doctor who maybe give us some assistance in identifying how we can help your return to work. So I think that is the obvious way of doing it. I think that yeah, I just feel that's your first step, what you have to do, and then you just have to follow it up from there on. I think. Patricia wants to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's again, there isn't really a proper science on this that I know of, certainly not within health and safety. But you know, one has to be careful not to overstress a person with loads of detail about the new organizational setup and charts and stuff. I wouldn't do that. They're out. If they're out for stress or work-related stress, I would keep it I'd be doing what I said before, which is keep any contact short and sweet and informative and supportive. But you can put in, there have been changes at work. You may have been aware of them. I'm more than happy to tell you all about them and share them with you. As soon as you're ready, please give me a buzz on this line or email me on this contact or let me know by return and I will fill you in them. I don't want to burden you with any more detail at the moment than you're able, but happy to. And if you're coming back next week, we might talk about it the week before. If you're coming back the week after, maybe then. So offer some things, but don't go sending big long emails with all the details. So, even those of us in the best of our health aren't overly keen on those. So I wouldn't.
Absolutely. I think that's fantastic advice. We will move on to something now that is a very topical one. And I think, again, as with anything in this, I don't know that there is a prescriptive answer for this, but it is in the context of employees that have been working remotely and they're returning to the workplace and they are unhappy, they are getting stressed, they are worried about coming back to an office environment, all those kind of factors, but the employer needs them in the office. It's essential that they're there to do their job. What can an employer do in that instance? Okay. Either of you, I think we'll have good insight on that one.
I think look, there are what I call some fundamental principles here. Your place of work is the office. And your employer is entitled to require you back at work. It's slightly tainted by the government guidelines around about deemed to be essential. But what I as an employer might regard as essential, you as an employee may not see as essential. And unfortunately, I would suggest that my authority supersedes your authority on this matter. I'm entitled to actually come back to work. My obligation is to make sure the workplace is safe. I mean, I've got to make sure that the protocols in place appropriate in the current environment are all there so that people coming into the workplace can feel safe. They know I'm doing what I should be doing. I'm applying the appropriate protocols. And, you know, some people will say, and I've come across already, you know, well, I've got to travel on the bus for half an hour, 3/4 of an hour. I'm sorry, that's the reality of life. It's your job to get here to work. I can't control that. But we need you back at work. So people are going to be stressed because they've been out for an awful long time. They've got used to living at home. They're now going to have to change their whole work style again to suit the workplace. Now, it is a very different work style. There's no question about it. But no, I mean, at the end of the day, I would always be saying the employer has the right, provided they're making sure they're fulfilling their responsibilities, to require someone to return back to the workplace.
I'll be brief on this because I know we're coming up to our 3 minutes to go. I think, as John said, employer must have protocols, and the employee does have to actually come back to the workplace when that is the government position. But the employer has to communicate fully to the employee that they have the protocols. See, the employer is going to spend a lot of time putting in place the protocols, having all the right signage, and really, you know, doing a great job to try and make it right. But they just assume everybody knows. So don't assume anybody knows, and don't assume Mary told Bill. Just tell everyone, but you know, don't tell them all in one big long email. Tell everyone, this is what we're going to do about the lift. This is what we're going to do about the canteen, separate little things. And then another thing, this is what we're going to do about your desk, Patricia, and your place around you. So just tell them in small bits so that they feel they're communicated with and it's safe. And then maybe make people feel that they're valued. A question came in there about the relationship between feeling valued and stress. And obviously there's a huge relationship between feeling valued. There's a thing that's called a psychological contract with work, which is much more than money. I have a psychological contract with my employer. They're going to be mindful of me and they're going to value me. And that's more than money. So that is a big link to stress. And if you don't feel looked at or seen or valued, absolutely. What you get then is often just something else, which is they cut off from work and they've got apathy. And apathy just leads to dysfunctionality. That's another story.
I think there's a whole other webinar in that. Look, I think we'll wrap it up there because we are heading into 5 to 2, and I know people will want to grab their cups of tea and stick their phones on charge before they head back. So just to say thank you very much to both John and Patricia for that. I think that was hugely beneficial for everyone. I think there was some great stuff covered off there. So thank you very much for giving us your time and your expertise.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much to everyone for your attendance and engagement. And just to confirm, we will be sending out a link to the recording of this along with all of the supports, guides, etc. that our team have been popping into the chat box as we've gone through. So you will get that over the next few days. So I think that's it, and we will wrap it up there.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much. All the best.